Let's talk about the most ignored, the most misunderstood, and the most underappreciated area of your guitar technique. One that's certainly causing you a whole lot of guitar playing grief right now if you're not paying attention to it. Your thumb. And I'm serious, if you have a hard time stretching your fingers on guitar, or shifting positions accurately on the fretboard, or playing up high where the frets are closer together, or if you struggle to bend strings in tune, or if your thumb hurts whenever you're playing bar chords for a long time, or if you struggle to keep your fingers closer to the strings when you play scales and arpeggios, chances are your thumb has a lot to do with those problems. So in this video, I'm going to show you exactly what your thumb should be doing with all the areas of technique I just mentioned, and then I'm going to give you some general guidelines for what to look for and what to pay attention to with your thumb position that's going to make playing and practicing guitar feel a heck of a lot easier and more effective than it probably is right now. Let's get into it. First, let's talk about stretching. If you struggle to play the stretchy licks and chords that you want to play, the number one reason for that is, you guessed it, your thumb position, not the size and shape of your hands and not the length of your fingers. Unless your hands are so small that somebody can tell how abnormally small they are from a distance, you're fine. But let's take a look at this example. This is G major add 9 chord, and you can see I can play it just fine, even though my hands are pretty average size. But guess what? I would never be able to play it if my thumb was either wrapped around the neck of the guitar, like many people try to play, or if it was anywhere near the bottom or the thickest two strings. If I start with this position, my arm hanging by the thumb, it's impossible for me to even form a proper bar chord, much less do the stretch I was doing earlier. To even get in that proper position, my thumb has to come down, and the more it comes down, all of a sudden, the more my hand can open up, and the stretch that would have been impossible for me otherwise suddenly becomes easier. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about stretching here. If you want to know more about how to practice difficult stretches, check out this video tutorial on the screen right now. There I go into all my best practices for how to do that. For right now, let's move on. Now let's talk about shifting positions on guitar, and believe it or not, your thumb position has a lot to do with you either doing position shifts cleanly and accurately or totally messing them up. Take for example this 2-string pattern on strings B and high E. 6-note groupings sound like this. Most people screw this up with their thumb because it begins to point sideways as they shift positions from the lower position to the higher position, and that's when their fingers get out of position and their hands get out of sync and the playing falls apart. Here's what it should look like when done correctly. As you can see, my thumb stayed behind the middle finger basically the whole time, and no matter if I was down here or up here, it was pointing up towards the ceiling. If you have a hard time doing that, if your thumb tends to turn sideways like it has a mind of its own, all you want to do to control it is separate your fretting hand from the picking hand and just do the motions of the position shift very slowly while watching your thumb and making sure it stays exactly where it needs to be. And as you do enough repetitions, your thumb will learn that that's where it's supposed to stay the whole time, and your position shifting will become a lot easier and more consistent. Now let's talk about bar chords. The number one problem people complain about when they play bar chords is their hand gets tired, their wrist begins to hurt, and the thumb begins to fatigue, and that makes it impossible to even play your way through a simple song. And what causes this is, you guessed it, the way you use your thumb. If you find yourself squeezing the crap out of the guitar neck when you play chords and when you strum hard, you're doing it wrong. What you want to do is you want to relax the shoulder, relax the bicep of your fretting hand, and that's going to relax your whole arm, and it's going to allow the weight of your arm to do much of the work to get the strings to the frets, not finger pressure and certainly not thumb pressure. When you get it right, it feels like the arm weighs almost nothing and it's doing all the work of fretting the bar chords for you. This is something that's impossible to really see when you're watching somebody on video until somebody points it out like I just did, but once you get it, you'll never struggle to play bar chords ever again. Now let's talk about string bending and vibrato. And even though I spent the first half of this video telling you to keep your thumb behind the neck of the guitar for all the examples I showed you, for string bending and vibrato, you finally want to start bringing it up and over the fretboard, because that's going to let you have the leverage you need to bend strings in tune and to get a nice, clear, and controlled vibrato. Even though it's theoretically possible to do vibrato and even string bends with the thumb behind the neck of the guitar, if you want to combine both, it's going to feel very awkward and you're not going to have any real control this way. But the moment you wrap your thumb over the neck of the guitar and notice how my elbow comes up and away from my body as well, all of a sudden I have a lot more leverage to do it right. That's how you do it. So if you're having a hard time bending strings in tune or getting a good vibrato sound, make sure your thumb is over the neck of the guitar, and that's going to make everything a lot easier. If you want more help with this, check out my video tutorial on bending and vibrato you can see on the screen right now. Now let's talk about an interesting detail of your thumb position you've probably never considered before. Check this out. Whenever you're playing anywhere from fret 1 to, let's say, fret 12, you want to keep your thumb behind the middle finger like I told you before, pointing up towards the ceiling. So your hand position should look roughly like this. But the moment you begin moving up significantly higher past the 12th fret, for sure past fret 15 or so, this becomes very hard to do. That's because the frets are so close together up here, you don't even need to have the thumb in that exact position. You're still going to be able to reach all the notes up here anyway. And second, depending on how your guitar is constructed up here, it's going to be very hard to bring the thumb exactly behind the middle finger and keep it in that position and not have your hand hit the bottom of the guitar right here. So what that means is when you're playing significantly past the 12th fret, the general rule kind of goes out the window and the exceptions come in. And the exceptions mean whenever you're playing on those higher frets, you can have the thumb wrap around the neck of the guitar a little bit when you're playing scales. That's completely fine. And you can even have the thumb point sideways a little bit and you'll still be fine. Remember, the reason why you want to have the thumb behind the middle finger as a general rule in the first place is to give your hand maximum support when you're playing on those lower frets where you need maximum flexibility. So make sure you can do this, get in this position on those lower frets, and then when you're up high, you can pretty much do whatever you want and you'll still play well. Another common example of a stretch that many people think is difficult, but it's actually really easy, is 3-note per string scales. Take, for example, this G major fingering right here. Many people think they can't get their hand to stretch this far, but when I look at their fretting hand, I see why right away. That's because their thumb is behind the index finger, and when they fret the note on the 3rd fret, then they have to stretch like this to reach the 5th fret, and from here it's impossible to get the pinky to fret 7 on the 6th string. All you need to do is move the thumb to be behind the middle finger, and all of a sudden the hand shifts, the pinky finger comes down to fret 7 on its own, and you're good to go. Now this may still take a little bit of practice, it's not going to come effortless to everybody, but it's going to feel a whole lot easier right away when you set yourself up for success by putting the thumb behind the middle finger. And if you're having a hard time with finger independence or getting the fingers to stay closer to the strings, examine your thumb position as well. Like we talked about with 3-note per string scales a moment ago, if your thumb is behind the index finger or even further back, that makes it more likely that these fingers are going to be coming up away from the strings. If you want to control that, just make sure the thumb is behind the middle finger at all times. That makes it easier for these guys to stay down as well. If you want to know even more about how to fix flying fingers in your playing, check out the video tutorial on the screen right now. There I'll show you how to do it step by step and in great detail. So let's recap and cover some general principles for what to do with your thumb when you play guitar. First, when you're playing scales and arpeggios on the lower frets from fret 1 to fret 12, you generally want your thumb behind the middle finger pointing up towards the ceiling. The part about keeping the thumb behind the middle finger is most important when you're playing, let's say, 3-note per string scales, because it'll be impossible to get your hand in this position any other way. If your thumb is behind the index finger, forget about it. The time when you definitely want to have your thumb wrapped around the neck of the guitar is for bends and vibrato. And the time when you might or might not have your thumb over the neck of the guitar is when you're playing past the 12th fret. Most of the time, it's going to be totally okay to have your thumb wrapped around the neck of the guitar like this, and even point sideways a little bit when you're on the higher frets, because the frets are so close together, you can still get away with it and play well. And on some licks, you need to combine bent notes and vibrato with some scales and scale sequences. So part of what you need to practice is changing the thumb position from behind the neck to over the neck to back behind the neck, because that's what you need to maintain full control over the licks. Like this, for example. Notice how I changed my thumb position back and forth several times, and that's part of what you need to pay attention to when you practice licks like this. Now, I know this is going to come up in the comments, so I'm just going to address it now. Some guitar players, like Yngwie or Paul Gilbert, as two examples that come to mind immediately, often play scales and scale sequences or arpeggios with their thumb over the neck of the guitar, even when they're playing on the lower frets. What's the deal with that? It's actually all really simple if you think back to what I said earlier about playing up high on the fretboard. I said that for most people it gets really uncomfortable to squeeze the fingers in these tight spaces between the higher frets and keep the thumb behind the middle finger at the same time. Well, for somebody with larger hands like Paul Gilbert or Yngwie, they experience that discomfort way sooner than the rest of us, meaning they experience that discomfort even on frets below 12, for example. So, to compensate for that, their thumb comes over the neck of the guitar, and that feels normal and that feels natural and effortless for them. But this is where many people get it wrong. They look at somebody like Yngwie or Paul Gilbert and think, oh, they're playing on the 7th fret and their thumb is wrapped around the neck of the guitar and they're playing just fine. I guess that's how I should have my hand too. But if your hand is just average or below average in size, it's not going to work for you. That's where you develop all kinds of bad habits, where you struggle with stretches or any of the other things that I mentioned earlier in this video. And this is a great example of why it's so dangerous to just blindly copy what your favorite players are doing simply by watching their videos without really understanding why they're doing what you're doing and if you should be doing that in your playing. So there you have it. Hopefully now you have a better appreciation for the role your fretting hand thumb plays in your technique and what it should be and should not be doing as you practice. Let me know in the comments below which of the tips I gave you today were most insightful for you, and also what topics do you want to see me make videos on in the future. If you want some help with building your guitar speed with less practice time, hit the link in the description of this video or go to the page that's on the screen right now. I'm going to show you a free 1-hour masterclass called Guitar Speed Formula. There I'll walk you through step by step how to build guitar speed without any slow practice and without having to gradually increase your speed on the metronome a few beats per minute at a time, because let's face it, it's a pretty boring way to practice, and more importantly, it doesn't really work all that well. If you've tried it, you probably know. If you want to know a different way to build guitar speed, hit the link, enter your email address, I'll send it right over to you. If you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, hit the bell so you're notified every time I upload new videos just like this for you. This is Mike Filipov, guitar practice expert from PracticeGuitarNow.com. See you next time.